Prior to the release of Skyward Sword, Nintendo went on record several times stating there was an official Zelda timeline. However, Nintendo refused to divulge its secrets and stated that leaving the chronology up to the imagination enriched the franchise. Then, in December of 2011, Nintendo released Hyrule Historia, a collector's book containing what it declared was the official Zelda timeline. According to Nintendo, there weren't just 2 timelines, there were actually 3. The official timeline began with the events in Skyward Sword, the adventure where Link and Zelda defeated Demise and established the Kingdom of Hyrule. The game laid the foundation for several of the games that followed. After Skyward Sword, the events of the Minish Cap and Four Swords took place. These 2 games were ultimately little more than side stories, which was ironic, considering they posed a problem for those who tried to piece together the timeline in the past. The question that remained was how the Minish Cap and Four Swords served as sequels to Skyward Sword. If you recall, at the end of Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda decided to settle on the surface where they established the Kingdom of Hyrule. However, the kingdom founded at the end of Skyward Sword was under constant attack by monsters. Nintendo decided that the backstory of the Minish Cap served as the basis for this time period. The Minish Cap and Four Swords also established 2 important elements: the forging of the Four Sword and the origin of the Wind Mage Vati, both of which reappeared later on in Four Swords Adventures. The missing thread in the puzzle was the link between Four Swords and Ocarina of Time. Hyrule Historia expanded on the story of the fierce war mentioned in Ocarina of Time, explaining it as a civil war that ravaged the kingdom after the events of Four Swords. A king eventually came forth and reunified the nation, setting the stage for Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time was where things got interesting. Earlier we mentioned that according to Zelda theorists, the game served as the focal point for their split timeline theory, creating 2 parallel realities. The split was created when Zelda sent Link back in time. However, in Hyrule Historia, Nintendo revealed that Ocarina of Time was the basis for the creation of a new, 3rd timeline. According to Nintendo, during the final battle with Ganon, Link was killed. With nobody to oppose him, Ganon went on to obtain the unified Triforce. This served as the perfect setup for the events known as the Seal War, described in the prologue of A Link to the Past, a war where the Knights of Hyrule fought Ganon and his forces, while the 7 sages found a way to seal the evil king. For a long time, the question of whether or not the events in Ocarina of Time could be interpreted as the Seal War was a point of contention for theorists. Nintendo finally found a way to accommodate the event when it created this 3rd, Fallen Hero timeline. The Fallen Hero timeline followed up Ocarina of Time with the events of A Link to the Past, the Oracle games, Link's Awakening, and finally the original 2 NES games. Theorists believe there was evidence to support this order, but definitively connecting the games wasn't possible without some new information provided by Nintendo. Given the imagery of the ship that Link sailed on in both Link's Awakening and the End of Oracles, some theorists had already surmised that these games were somehow connected. In the official timeline, Oracles of Ages and Seasons did indeed follow the events of A Link to the Past, as Link set sail for Hyrule. During his voyage home, he was shipwrecked, and the events of Link's Awakening followed. The last mystery that had puzzled theorists was how exactly any Zelda installment connected to the games that started it all, The Legend of Zelda and its sequel, The Adventure of Link. Nintendo provided a backstory in the manual of The Adventure of Link that outlined the events that transpired long before the NES games. However, this backstory was never intended to have any connection to the prequels that followed. 2 major barriers always prevented theorists from conclusively determining their position in a Zelda timeline without additional lore. How was the unified Triforce split up in The Legend of Zelda? And how was Ganon able to return? Hyrule Historia didn't offer a proper answer to these questions, but the backstory of The Adventure of Link was reworked to serve as the connection between these 2 time periods. Sometime after A Link to the Past, the King of Hyrule was forced to split up the Triforce, leaving only the Triforce of Wisdom and Power with the royal family. The Triforce of Courage was hidden away within a distant palace. Ganon somehow managed to return and claim the Triforce of Power, and then began an invasion of Hyrule to capture the remaining pieces. This then led into Link's quest to reunite the Triforce of Wisdom and defeat Ganon in The Legend of Zelda. As for The Adventure of Link, it was always described as a direct sequel, so it made sense that it followed immediately after. That was the last game in this new timeline. For timeline theorists, the Fallen Hero timeline established a bewildering precedent for future installments. Within any existing game, Nintendo provided itself with a scapegoat since a timeline could be drawn where Link failed. It created almost unlimited possibilities for future Zelda games. The other two timelines were the direct result of Zelda's actions at the end of Ocarina of Time, something Nintendo had already confirmed in an interview conducted after the release of Twilight Princess. Though fans knew this for several years, what exactly transpired in either of these timelines wasn't clear. One of these timelines followed the exploits of Link as a child after he was sent back to the day when he first met Princess Zelda in Ocarina of Time. These were followed by Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Four Swords Adventures in a chronology commonly referred to as the Child Link timeline. The name isn't a reference to the appearance of Link, but rather that this continuity began after Link went back to his childhood in Ocarina of Time. What came next was no surprise, given that Majora's Mask was always labeled as a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time that involved the same incarnation of Link. The placement of Twilight Princess after Majora's Mask was also expected, given that Eiji Onuma's quote that stated Twilight Princess took place after Majora's Mask. Twilight Princess gave theorists a conclusive ending to this Child Link timeline as it culminated with the slaying of Ganon, but a missing piece still existed: Four Swords Adventures. Hyrule Historia told the story of how this game directly followed the events in Twilight Princess. Most puzzling was that Ganon appeared in both games, yet was slain at the end of Twilight Princess. According to Nintendo, the Ganon in Four Swords Adventures was an entirely new entity. Being a new character, this Ganon had no recollection of his predecessor's ambitions, aside from his lust for power. He manipulated Link and Zelda into freeing Vati from his imprisonment within the Four Sword. With the heroes occupied trying to contain the Wind Mage, Ganon rose to power, but in the end, Link and Zelda ultimately sealed him within the Four Sword. The final timeline left to tackle followed Zelda's thread of the story after she sent Link back in time to warn her former self about Ganon's scheme to overthrow the kingdom. The events that followed were told in The Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and finally Spirit Tracks. This branch of the trio of timelines was referred to as the Adult Link timeline because these games continued on after the exploits of Adult Link in Ocarina of Time. It was also the easiest to decipher for those who followed the stories. Zelda was left alone to oversee the restoration of her kingdom in the aftermath of Ganon's reign. Many years passed, and the Menace, who had been sealed away by Zelda and the Sages, managed to break free using the Triforce of Power. He threatened the kingdom once again, while the people of Hyrule believed the Hero of Time would return to save them. But the hero never came. These are the exact events described in the prologue of The Wind Waker, which culminated with the gods sealing Hyrule and Ganon below the sea in a great flood. Link's adventures across this great sea followed, and from there the subsequent games made perfect sense. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks were all part of a single narrative thread that began in The Wind Waker. These direct sequels chronicled the quest of Link and Zelda as they set out to find a new home. Hyrule was destroyed at the end of The Wind Waker, and the duo set out and established a new kingdom. Phantom Hourglass was a minor detour in their journey, while Spirit Tracks was set in the land Link and Zelda eventually colonized. This new Hyrule wasn't likely to see the return of Ganon, the Triforce, or the Master Sword. This faraway land provided a fresh new start for the lore of the series, for Hyrule Historia stated that the bloodlines of those tied to the ancient kingdom were growing thin, so going forward, a new history would be spun. Three distinct timelines. Skyward Sword, the Minish Cap, Four Swords, and then Ocarina of Time served as the point where the timelines diverged. The Fallen Hero timeline consisted of A Link to the Past, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, Link's Awakening, The Legend of Zelda, and finally, The Adventure of Link. The Child Link timeline was comprised of Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Four Swords Adventures. And finally, the Adult Link timeline contained The Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks. The official Zelda timeline was 25 years in the making. Sorting it out was a tall order, but just imagine how difficult it was to decipher the truth, relying solely on the games, manuals, and occasional cryptic interview. Decades of fan speculation on how the games fit together in a timeline concluded as the series creators filled in the blanks with brand new lore. This backstory in Hyrule Historia provided the final pieces of the puzzle for enthusiasts. Since 1986, The Legend of Zelda's timeline wove an intricate series of threads that created its own subculture of fans, unlike any other franchise in gaming history. It could be argued that its final canon was pieced together by both its creators and fans alike.